Hi, I'm Richard Murphy, and this is the 11th in the video series on the importance of tax transparency that I am hosting, and which is being made jointly by the University of Sheffield, where I work as Professor of Accounting Practice, the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, and the International Budget Partnership. In this video, I'm going to talk about an issue facing every tax authority I have ever come across, and I have talked to quite a lot of them. That is, how to collect tax from those who would rather not tell the tax authority what they are doing. These are the people in what some call the shadow economy and others call the informal sector. Because all tax authorities have to face the reality of there being an informal sector within their economy, they all have to ask these questions. Is it worth trying to tax this sector? Will doing so cause more harm than good? Can the tax that this sector might pay be collected in another way? Might those other ways also have harmful consequences? Are there better ways to raise the lost revenue? And how can tax morale be maintained if attempts are made to tax the informal economy when doing so might be very unpopular? These are important questions. Whilst they will be considered here, they also form part of the discussion on both the tax gap and tax spillover analysis, which issues feature in later videos. That's not because we're going to duplicate ourselves. Instead, it is because we think this is an issue that does require careful consideration from multiple angles. Data is useful when answering some of these questions that I have raised. That said, it is important to note that by its very nature, data on the informal economy is hard to find. By definition, that sector does not wish to record its activities. As a result, varying methods of estimation are required to calculate the scale and impact of this sector. For example, data on the following might need to be estimated. Firstly, how many people work within this sector? Secondly, what's the average likely income of someone within the informal economy? Thirdly, is there likely to be any record of what they actually earn? Fourthly, on the basis of that information, what proportion of the total economy is likely to be in the informal sector? And what tax revenues might be foregone as a result when making reasonable assumptions as to likely tax charges that might arise? The obvious question that then follows is it even possible to tax this sector? There are a number of ways to answer these questions, all of which involve estimates. For example, population data and changes in it can be imputed from other information if it is available. Some countries do this by imputing population data from electricity or water consumption. That is extraordinarily consistent per household, but is only known if it is reliably metered, which may not be the case. Another method some countries use to estimate population is to monitor staple food consumption. What this might be varies from place to place, but when it is known, variations in consumption tend to be really good indicators of population change. Based on this population data, it might then be possible to work out how many people this implies there might be in the jurisdiction, to estimate how many of these people might be working based on local data on the age profile of the population and the number who are likely to be working in each age group. From this total can be deducted the number of likely working people who are known to be paying tax, and to deduce, as a consequence, the number of people in the shadow economy or informal sector. Estimating how much these people earn on average is a calculation best done on the basis of sample data. The techniques to use will have to suit local circumstances. It is important to remember that one figure may not suit the whole of a country. Regional variations are very likely to exist in all but the smallest of jurisdictions. If estimates of this sort can be prepared, then the number of people working in the informal sector and their total likely income, and so income per head, and the possible tax lost as a result of the existence of this sector can all be estimated. It might then be possible to decide if attempts should be made to tax this sector or not. It is stressed that there are a lot of estimates in this calculation. This is something that those involved in tax transparency debates have to get used to. Whilst at an individual level, tax might be all about making precise disclosures of tax liabilities owing, at an aggregate level, where decisions about a tax system as a whole have to be made, estimates very often have to be used when preparing data. It is always important to be willing to question those estimates, asking, are the assumptions made appropriate? Is the data used to prepare the estimates the best available? Do the mathematical techniques used look fair? Be wary of spurious accuracy, because it can rarely be justified. Do the resulting numbers make sense? And are there better ways to prepare these estimates? Once these estimates have been prepared, it is then appropriate to ask whether taxing the informal sector is still an appropriate course of action. This requires any government to decide whether the social, economic, industrial, and even foreign policy consequences of taxing that sector are worth the stress and the rewards involved. This decision will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It is, however, important to note that no jurisdiction in history has ever collected all the tax owing to it anywhere in the world. At this point, questions about other tax bases from which tax might be collected if the informal sector is to be left untaxed are likely to arise. For example, it might be asked which other tax bases can accept the additional tax burden if the chance of collecting money from the informal sector is low. These questions might require that the following issues be addressed. Are there, for example, indirect taxes like VAT or taxes on staple products such as fuel that can be used instead? Are completely different tax bases, for example on the extractive industries, more than capable of generating the required revenues without the issues associated with taxing the informal sector? Is this a matter to be decided upon by local government, depending on the likely size of the informal sector in their region? And can wealth taxes be used to make good the shortfall? There are no right or wrong answers to these questions. An open mind is required. If it is decided that attempts will be made to tax the informal sector, the following need to be explained if tax transparency is to be maintained. Why the tax is being charged, what the tax will be charged on, how it will be charged, how attempts will be made to collect it, what right of appeal there is. Any such tax measures will need to be simple if they are to be effective, so they must embrace the following, which must be made clear. Low tax rates. Tax charges based on simple estimates of income suited to the local economy. The right to appeal against the charge in very simple and cheap ways, and the provision of easy ways to pay, with instalment options being available. Communicating whatever decision is made is vital. Engaging relevant parties is important for gathering their views and potentially securing greater buy-in for any decisions made. To achieve this, it is important to clearly define the objectives and scope of public participation in this decision-making process, and to then design the participation mechanism using appropriate tools. At a minimum, even if the objective is simply to inform people about a decision, effective communication is essential. Simple methods of communication that can be used include radio adverts, a variety of internet-based methods, text messaging, local tax office meetings, and the use of local media, such as newspapers, when they are available. Even then, the risk of failure to communicate and to collect tax has to be managed, with the resentment that gives rise to. In all this, protecting tax morale is vital, and may ultimately be the reason why it is decided that this sector should not be taxed. If the informal sector is not to be taxed, then that decision still needs to be explained so that the following are understood. Why this is not being done, what is being done instead, how much this saves people in taxes not demanded from them, and what this means for public services. The same types of media as noted previously should be used. The aim should be to explain this tax policy, make clear that there has been a positive decision not to tax, but to make clear that tax is still required from others, and to explain why this might be fair. Transparency and engaging the public is, as ever, key in that case.